everybody should be open to the Chapter 8, Lesson 3 notes in their vocab notebook. They should have a squiggly line under the last word. And then today's date. And your textbook should be open to page 388.
Oh, yesterday
Did you not write any yesterday?
No, we didn't.
Okay, then just change the date from yesterday's, from the 6th to the 7th. So just erase 6 and write 7 for the date. And then we're starting with number 6, which you should already have written. Okay, and your book should be open at page 388. Is it number 8? Sorry, I was looking at it upside down on Cullen from far away. Number 8, sorry. So you should have just changed the 6th to the 7th on yesterday's date. Nothing else changes. Okay, on page 388, please read Cullen.
What else is in our solar system? Not all objects in the solar system are planets or moons. Similar objects.
Not similar. Point to the word.
Similar.
Not similar. Similar is spelled S-I-M-I-L-A-R. This word is spelled S-M-A-L-L-E-R.
Oh, smaller objects also revolve around the sun.
Okay. So, Kingston, I think you had a question the other day about what this page is going to tell us. So what it's saying, there's not just... No, I think it was Kingston that asked this question. Maybe it was you. Okay. Anyway, not the most important thing. So, it's not just planets and moons. There's some other stuff too. Tell us about the first type of object that also revolves around the sun, me. Comets. A comet is mostly ice mixed with rocks and dust. So, number 8 is the word comet. What is a comet? Well, it's an object in space that is made mostly of ice mixed with rocks and dust. We're on to science, so you just need to catch up. So a comet is an object in space made mostly of ice mixed with rocks and dust. So finish that, and then go back to your book because we need to add something. Because there's a few things in space that are made mostly of ice mixed with rocks and dust. So we need to keep going. We need to add a little more, which means we have to read a little further. So finish that definition, then go back to your book. The next sentence says, it moves in a long, narrow orbit. We'll go ahead and add that to the definition to show how it's different from something else. Yes, Mason? That's okay. Just start at the pink line and don't number it. Well, you can put 8 to show that it keeps going or something. So, it's an object in space made mostly of ice mixed with rocks and dust that has a long, narrow orbit. And what that means is instead of the other planets having an orbit that's kind of like this, a comet has an orbit like It gets much closer to the sun, and then it goes much further away than a lot of the other planets. And it usually does not, what it does is it'll a lot of times go outside of other orbits, kind of like that. So sometimes we can see comets, right? Like this picture at the top. It says Comet Hale-Bopp last approached the sun in the 1990s. Well, it's just a piece of ice and rock. Why can we see it all the way on Earth? Well, keep reading and you'll find out why. When a comet nears the sun, it heats up very quickly. This forms a tail of gas and dust pointing away from the sun. So what that means is when the comet is like here or here, see how it's closer to the sun? It heats up really quickly. And so what happens is we get this tail of gas and dust. And it's very hot gas and dust. So when it gets close to the sun like this and it develops that tail because it's so hot, that's when we can see it. That's why it takes so long for us to be able to see it again. Because look, these orbits are really, really long, which means it might take hundreds of years to get from here to here, where it's close to the sun again. If it's not close to the sun, it's not heated, it doesn't have that tail of hot gas and dust, we can't see it. If it's out here, it's very cool, and it's just basically a piece of icy rock up in the sky. We can't see it. There's really no light shining upon it. It's too small to see, even if there is light shining on it. Yes, quickly.
What happens when a comet hits Earth?
Well, they don't. Comets do not hit Earth. We'll keep reading to find out what does hit Earth. Yes, quickly, Carla. We have 9 minutes.
Comets mostly called wishing stars?
No, those are something different.
Okay.
Comets are comets. Comets are not what we think of as shooting stars. They don't hit planets. We will talk about what does. Sorry, I can't see you at all. Please don't make me say that again. You can see yourself in the little picture. So you know, if you can't really see yourself, I definitely can't see you. Okay, so those are comets. Comets have an orbit that they stay in. Next, Kingston. What else do we see in space? Or what else is up there in space? Aaron, what else do we see up in space? Or, well, maybe we don't see it, but what else is there in space?
Asteroids are large chunks of rock or metal in space.
So, what's our next word, Aaron? Asteroids. Make sure you spell it right. It's right in front of you. There's no excuse to spell it right. I mean, to spell it incorrectly. And what are asteroids?
Large chunks of rock or metal in space.
Large chunks of rock or metal in space. So right now, other than the fact that asteroids can be made of metal and don't seem to be made of ice, they don't seem too different from comets. Well, Aaron, when you're ready, keep reading and maybe we'll figure out what the difference is.
The solar system has thousands of asteroids. Most of them lie in a belt between Mars and Jupiter.
So we read that comets have an orbit. Did it say anything about asteroids having their own specific orbit? No, it says that they're in a belt kind of all together that does orbit. So all of these asteroids are kind of together in one orbit around the sun. And they stay in the same place. Who knows where the asteroid belt is? Well, it says it. Sorry. Where is the asteroid belt? Smith.
Between Mars and Jupiter.
Between Mars and Jupiter. So does the asteroid belt move? Does it have a weird orbit like a comet? No, it stays in the same comet all the time unless something happens. So there's the difference. Comets have their own orbit that is like very different from all the planets' orbits, which we saw in that little picture I drew. Asteroids are in orbit with all the other asteroids in an orbit that's very similar to the planets. But sometimes they get out of orbit because what happens? Read next, Carla. Meteoroids.
When
Asteroids.
asteroids collide, pieces of rock or metal may break off. These smaller pieces are called meteoroids.
Okay, we're going to add that. So number 10 is the word meteoroids. Meteoroids. And meteoroids are small chunks. No, we're going to call it small pieces, not chunks. Small pieces of asteroids that have been broken off. So meteoroids are not asteroids. An asteroid is this big chunk of rock or metal in orbit within the asteroid belt. Sometimes they bump into each other. And what happens sometimes when you hit one rock against another? What happens sometimes? Not all the time. Zadie?
A piece breaks.
A piece breaks off. And we have these smaller pieces that have broken off. These are asteroids. These are meteoroids. The broken pieces of asteroids are meteoroids. Yes, Ethan?
What are the kinds of rocks that
I don't know what kind of rocks.
Saturn?
What?
What are the are those the kind of rocks that are on Saturn's moon?
No. It's different. They're like different. They're made of different things. So again, here's the difference. A comet has a weird orbit. It's nothing like a planet's orbit. We can see it when it gets close to the sun and gets really hot and gets this long, that tail on it. Asteroids are large chunks of rock or metal in space that orbit all together in an oval, an ellipse between Mars and Jupiter. Read next to tell us about two more things we find in space. Zadie.
If a meteoroid enters Earth's atmosphere, it is called a meteor.
So, what's our next word, Zadie?
A meteor.
Meteor. And what is a meteor?
A meteor is
You said this word, you know it. A meteor is, who can help her out? Colin? A meteor is, Smith?
A meteoroid that enters Earth's atmosphere.
A meteoroid that enters Earth's atmosphere. A meteor is a meteoroid, so that broken piece of asteroid that gets out of orbit because it's small, so it's able to get out of orbit and enters Earth's atmosphere. Zari, please pick up the camera. You were not having problems with this yesterday, and now all of a sudden you are. That is not, that. A meteoroid that enters Earth's atmosphere is a meteor. So we have this tiny little broken chunk of an asteroid. It broke off of the asteroid way over here. Well, it's small, so it's easier for it to leave that asteroid belt. Now here's Earth. Here's our atmosphere. This meteor has left the asteroid belt, traveled through that bit of space, and now it's in our atmosphere. It is now a meteor. It is no longer a meteoroid. It is now a meteor. But now it's just up in our atmosphere. It hasn't hit us. It hasn't come to Earth. It's up in the atmosphere. Well, something might happen to it next. Keep going, Zadie.
Small meteors burn up in the atmosphere, leaving streaks of light across the sky. We call them shooting stars. But they are not stars at all.
So, Carla, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yes. So a shooting star is not a comet, it's not an asteroid, and it's not a meteoroid. It's one of these meteors. Because what happened is that piece of the asteroid, the meteoroid, somehow got out of orbit enough to get into our atmosphere. When it gets into our atmosphere, it gets really, really hot and it starts to burn. Well, when something starts to burn, it looks like fire, right? It looks like it's burning. So then we see it, and we call it a shooting star. But it's not a star falling out of the sky. It's a meteor falling through Earth's atmosphere. Now, a lot of times these meteors burn up before they hit the surface of Earth. Most of the time they completely burn up and they're gone. They don't hit the surface because they've just burned up. What happens to something when you burn it a lot? What happens to something when you completely burn it? It turns into, Michaela?
I was going to say it disintegrates.
Well, it disintegrates. Ooh, that's a good word. It turns into ash or dust. It disintegrates to where it's just gone. It's not there. Maybe some dust hits the ground, but we don't even see it because it's so small. But occasionally, that meteor was large enough that it doesn't completely burn up. What happens if it's large enough that it burns in our atmosphere, but it doesn't completely burn up? Zadie, keep going.
If a meteor reaches Earth's surface, it is called a meteorite.
So, a meteorite is a what?
If
It is a
meteor that reaches Earth's surface.
So a meteorite is a meteor that reaches Earth's surface. So you must know the difference because, hint, hint, you will have a question all about these on your test, a short answer question. It will look something like, what is the difference between these things? So remember, these are different things. However, a comet is the only thing that is completely different. All of these start in the same place. All of these three things, meteoroids, meteors, and meteorites, start as an asteroid. A comet is the only one that's completely different because a comet is just an object in space made of mostly ice and rock that has its own weird orbit. It's not elliptical in the same way ours is. It can cross orbits, whatever. When it gets close to the sun in that little narrow part, that's where it gets really hot and we see it. An asteroid is just that large chunk of rock that travels in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. It stays in that same orbit. It doesn't really move out of it unless some asteroids collide and meteoroids break off, those small little pieces of the asteroid. They can leave that orbit of the asteroid belt and end up in Earth's atmosphere as a meteor. They burn up. Most of them burn away. We call those shooting stars. Some of them get all the way to Earth, and they're called a meteorite. So if you find a piece of asteroid on the ground on Earth, it is a meteorite. So does everybody understand the difference between these 5 things? Because you will have a test question all about them. Yes, Mason.
How big is the gulf between Mars and Jupiter?
It's pretty wide. I'm not really sure exactly how wide, but it's pretty wide because look at the difference between the distance of Mars from the sun, and the distance of Jupiter. Now, of course, the asteroid belt doesn't take up that whole amount of space, but it's pretty big in between those 2 planets. Yes, quickly, Victoria, and then we have to pack up. And then Michaela, and then we have to go.
What's around Saturn?
Just pieces of ice and rock. Not comets, because do they have their own orbit, those pieces of ice and rock in Saturn's ring? And not asteroids, because are they between Mars and Jupiter? No. And also, are they really, really, really big? No. These asteroids are like miles big. Not feet or meters big, like the chunks of ice and rock in Saturn's rings, but like miles across.
I accidentally pressed snooze too fast. So
That's okay.
it's gonna go off.
That's okay. Yes, no, Michaela, and then I'll answer your question individually, okay?
Are meteoroids rare to find on Earth?
Well, do meteoroids go to Earth, come all the way to Earth's surface? You mean meteorites?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, like I said, most of the time meteors burn up entirely and disintegrate. Meteorites is like the rare times it does make it all the way to Earth. Okay, some of you are not listening to that at all. I didn't tell you to get ready to go yet. I just said after I answer Michaela's question, then we will get ready. So, Michaela had a really good question, which would really help her on the test, and she's one of the only ones that heard it. So, there you go. You have a little bit of an advantage, and anybody who is listening has a little bit of an advantage. Okay, now, you may get your stuff ready to go. Leave your science book because you do have homework. It's an outline. It is due on Monday. Leave your vocab notebooks out because you can go ahead and work on your reading tonight if you want to. Your review and